happy to welcome you again to the Sequoia Park Zoo and also to the kickoff of our 9th annual conservation lecture series. As Gretchen mentioned, I've been a member of the committee since its inception in 2011. My name is Michaela Gunther, and I'm a faculty member at Humboldt State University. I teach in the Department of Wildlife, and I just have really enjoyed being part of this Conservation Advisory Committee. And we all contribute in different ways, and some of the work that I've helped with is helping to organize this lecture series, because I really love to bring biologists, wildlife biologists, foresters and botanists and all sorts of people working on nature conservation in the area, and for the community to hear about what they're doing. And so this has been a really special part. We have science lectures at the university that you're all welcome to attend, and they're free and exciting, but these ones are meant for community members to hear what's going on right here in your backyards and on the coast. And so I've really enjoyed helping to organize these. And it's also my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, because I know Claire. Claire has been here in Humboldt for a few years, and she was a graduate student in the Department of Wildlife, recently finishing her master's degree with Dan Barton, one of our other faculty members, and she looked at colonies of seabirds right off the north coast here. And she finished her master's recently, as I said, and went on to currently working now for the Seabird Protection Network with BLM. And I was really excited, just as she was graduating, would you please come give a talk to our Sequoia Park Zoo lecture series, because she's a super dynamic speaker, is very passionate about her work. And she did this work recently on the seabirds, but before that, and also during, she's done a lot of work with the seals and sea lions, all the way sort of down south, Farallon Island, it's not super south, all the way up to the Aleutian Islands. She's been working on marine mammals and marine birds. And she loves to share that information with communities. She's been doing that before she came to Humboldt. She did her undergraduate at UC Santa Cruz. And in between was working for organizations and NGOs where she taught people about coastal wildlife. And so this is what she does, and she's good at it. And she wants to share that with us today. So I'm really happy to introduce Claire Nasser. Thanks for coming.
That was the best intro ever. Thanks so much, Michaela. And the bar is high. Can everyone hear me in the back? Cool. If that changes, there's a microphone and I can use it, so just shout out. I also have a tendency to speak quickly, so if I'm talking too fast, just be like, Claire, slow down, okay? Perfect. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. I'd like to acknowledge the zoo. I think I have a slide acknowledging the zoo. In graduate school, I would come here often as a zoo member, and it really brought peace and tranquility to sometimes a chaotic life. And so thank you to the staff and the volunteers and everyone who makes the zoo possible, including, I think, a lot of folks here. So today, I'm going to mostly be talking about seals and sea lions. This talk was advertised to include seabirds, and at the end of this talk, I'm going to be talking a lot about seabirds and how you can be involved with seabird research. But once I was creating this PowerPoint, it ended up being like an hour and a half when I included seabirds, and so they get 10 minutes, but we're really going to focus on pinnipeds, which are seals and sea lions. It's really important to me that I show you these numbers before we dive in. These are marine mammal, essentially permit numbers, and it allows me and my colleagues to work really closely with marine mammals. So you're gonna see a lot of videos and photos today of people approaching marine mammals, which is great, but the public is not allowed to do that. So I know I'm spending a lot of time talking about these numbers, but it took me a decade to be able to work with these marine mammals, and I encourage you to look at marine mammals, but not to approach them. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about that later. So yeah, thank you so much to the zoo. I'm so excited to be here. So this is okay, that's gonna happen a lot. So this is a general outline of my talk today. We're going to have a general overview of marine mammals and how marine mammals, especially pinnipeds, have adapted to an aquatic existence. You can't leave this talk today without knowing the difference between a seal and a sea lion. So we're going to focus on that for about 5 minutes. After that, I'm going to be describing some species that you can see right offshore. And if you can take away one species that you can identify, I would consider that a win. Then for a handful of species, especially elephant seals, I'm going to be discussing the relevant research that has been taking place from about UC Santa Cruz, potentially up to the Aleutians. And I'm also going to tell you about a program that's happening in the King Range National Wilderness as well. Conservation area, sorry. And then finally, I'm going to talk about our community scientist program. If there's questions, I would like to save them to the end. But if you have a burning one or I didn't make sense, shoot up a hand and we'll answer it. But if you're okay with it, let's wait till the end. This is the most narcissistic slide I've ever created. But I wanted to briefly share with you my qualifications to give this talk. I've been working with pinnipeds for about a decade, both in captivity and in the wild. I would say most of it has been with wild animals, and certainly we could have an ethics discussion about captive animals, and I'd be happy to talk about it with you. But it's something that I'm really proud of, and I think it has really helped us understand these species. And so if you want to talk about it, maybe we'll talk about it at the end. But most of my work has been focused with northern elephant seals. Today, I'm wearing my Bureau of Land Management name tag. I'm representing the Bureau of Land Management today, but there's going to be lots of other agencies that I've worked with that I need to acknowledge before diving in. Okay, so marine mammals. There are 5 groups of marine mammals, and it's really important to remember what makes a mammal a mammal. Do you guys remember this from first grade? Okay, let's see if I can do it on the spot. So you have to have warm blood, right? You're warm-blooded. You have hair or fur, you breathe air, you give live birth, and you drink milk. Okay, so all of these animals do that, and which is pretty amazing. So one group, the cetaceans, are the whales, dolphins, and porpoises. Another group of marine mammals are the polar bears. All of these animals are finding their resources in the water. That's what makes them a marine mammal. There's sea otters, which are okay. Sea otters are awesome, but they evolved from the terrestrial lifestyle to the marine lifestyle about 1 million years ago. So they're not as specialized as, say, the whales, right, that came into the water hundreds of millions of years ago. Then we have the dugongs and the manatees and the extinct stellar sea cow. And then finally, this is a fact. We have the coolest group of marine mammals, and those are the pinnipeds. We're going to take just a moment to break down that word, pinniped. The prefix pinna means feather or winged, and then ped, like pedestrian, means foot. So these are the feather, winged, or flipper-footed animals. Oh. So all groups of pinnipeds evolved from an animal called Aneliarctos about 20 to 25 million years ago. There was some discussion among evolutionary biologists who care about these kinds of phylogenetic trees and nodes and how animals are related to one another, that some groups of scientists thought seals and sea lions had a common ancestor, and some people thought that they had different ancestors. And that was based on either kind of morphological traits, or if you look at the DNA, it tells a different story. Essentially, what I'll share with you today is that we've kind of come to the conclusion that seals, sea lions, and walruses had a common ancestor, we think, called Aneliarctos. So again, these are the 3 groups of marine mammals. Unfortunately, we don't have any walruses here, so we're going to focus on seals and sea lions in this talk. Can everyone still hear me okay in the back? Awesome. And so, again, these animals are marine mammals, right? So they have all of those 5 kind of things that they have to deal with while living in the marine environment. So I'm going to go over what I think are really special adaptations for marine existence. And that word, if we're unfamiliar, we're going to have just a really simple definition of adaptation. I'm going to say an adaptation is just a behavior or a body part that helps an animal survive. So we're going to go over these 4 adaptations. So seawater is super dense to move through. It's really hard to move through seawater. And so pinnipeds have these special adaptations to help them move through the water. They have appendages that have been modified into flippers, And their bodies are kind of torpedo-shaped or fusiform-shaped, and they help them move through the water in a very hydrodynamic and efficient way. I think that's cool. So I told you that they're warm-blooded, right? But the water is super duper cold. And so to live a life at sea, you have to have adaptations to stay warm. That's really distracting. I'm so sorry. So all pinnipeds have blubber, and some of them have fur. All of them have fur, excuse me. Some of them have very dense fur. And pups, especially phocids, or the true seals, which you'll understand in a moment, the true seals are a lot of times born with a lanugo. Does anyone know what species this is? It's a harp seal. So that's a harp seal pup in the Arctic. And they have a bright white lanugo, which helps them kind of blend in with the ice, and I think it helps with like thermal regulation as well. I just said that. Lanugo is the fur that they're born with, essentially. So that white fur is called a lanugo. Harbor seals that we have here typically kind of shed that in utero, but a lot of pups are born with a lanugo. We'll see another example of a lanugo in a couple slides from now. So in the same kind of breadth of regulation and regulating their temperature, sometimes pinnipeds get too hot. And so they have a way to kind of deal with that too. These are a northern elephant seal and a southern elephant seal flipping sand on their bodies to help them stay cool. Female elephant seals will do this too when they're being copulated with. I think they do it because they're agitated as well. But in this case, they're doing it because they're hot. And all pinnipeds molt their fur, okay, right? Just like seabirds and birds, they molt their feathers. A lot of animals shed. Some pinnipeds go through something called a catastrophic molt, which is a perfect name for what this process looks like. This is a northern elephant seal male. In the summertime, they haul out, and essentially they shed big patches of fur and skin on the beach. It takes about a month. That's a really hard and important process for them in their survival. There's another pinniped biologist in the room, and she can call me out on this. I think the only other pinniped that goes through a catastrophic molt is the Hawaiian monk seal. Is that right? Okay. So another important adaptation if you're living a life at sea is to find food. And a lot of these pinnipeds find food at really deep depths, but they also have to breathe air. It's this really interesting duality. And so elephant seals are the coolest of all the pinnipeds because they can dive up to a mile underwater, which is pretty neat. And I'm going to, or maybe someone, okay, if I can reach it, Michaela, maybe you can help me. There's a video queued up on YouTube thing. Oh, yeah. And if you just scroll down, we can like look at it together. Are you okay doing that? Yeah. So this is a really fun app that you can go to. The website is really easy, and it's a really fun, interactive kind of way to explore what an elephant seal does on its dives. It's definitely worth sharing and looking at, but they have really cool adaptations. Like they have this thing called hemoglobin, which we do too, but instead of just red blood cells to hold oxygen, they have special kind of cells in their body, in their muscle tissue that helps them hold oxygen. When they dive, this is amazing. When they dive, they have essentially lungs that can collapse. I don't think that's even in here, but when they're diving, their lungs collapse, and they have these little joints in their ribs that essentially allow those lungs to collapse. And then when they are coming to the surface, they have this special snot that helps them reinflate their lungs called surfactant. So there's also really awesome adaptations. I encourage you to go to this website and have fun with it. That's it. Yeah. Thanks, Michaela. Okay. So we went over some cool adaptations. This is the most, I think, important adaptation, and there's some videos here I'm going to talk about in a moment. But pinnipeds have this incredible ability to hear things in air and underwater. And so a part of my research that I worked with on for about 5 years was at UC Santa Cruz's Pinniped Cognition and Sensory Systems Lab. And at this lab, we had trained pinnipeds to essentially perform hearing tests with us. And so these are 2 ice seals. We have a spotted seal on the left and a bearded seal on the right, who are choosing to essentially work with us in this experiment. And what we're asking the seal to do is to put their little head on a station underwater. I'm above the surface, you can't see me, but I'm training these animals. And they're trained to put their little head essentially on this paddle, and there's a speaker behind them in both of these videos. And we have a tone that plays. Emma, do you want to give what the tone sounds like? I'm just calling you out. It's like whoop, essentially. It's like a little tone. And if they hear the tone, they put their nose to the paddle. If they don't hear the tone, they kind of leave their chin on that station, okay? Just like how when we take a hearing test and we raise our hand. Pretty awesome, right? I think it's cool. And so with that, we can get something called an audiogram, and we can understand the thresholds of what these animals are capable of hearing both underwater and in air, which is really valuable for understanding their essentially their hearing capacity and their physiology at sea when we're kind of doing some offshore benthic exploration for like oil and gas. In order to understand what the bottom of the ocean looks like, sometimes you have to blast really loud sounds in the ocean. So understanding what they can even hear is really important. Chemoreceptive sensitivity, that's like your sense of smell. We don't think that they have a very strong sense of smell, except with some types of sea lions. When they go out to shore and they have to go find their pup, and a mass of pups, you'll see them kind of use their sense of smell. So besides that, I don't think they have a super strong sense of smell. Where do you think they get their tactile sensitivity? Where do you think that comes from? Yeah, their whiskers, totally. And pinniped biologists call their whiskers vibrissae because they sense vibrations in the water. I was also involved with a project, so was Emma, who I keep calling out over here, where we worked with a harbor seal who was essentially trained to wear a blindfold and track an underwater submarine. And so he was able to just use his whiskers to kind of sense the wake of that underwater. Super cool. And they also have very, very sensitive vision. They have this body part in their eyeball. Is that a body part? I don't know. They have this adaptation in their eye called a tapetum lucidum, which other species have too. And it just essentially helps kind of absorb light at really deep depths. Okay. I think you can actually sort of see it in that picture. Okay, this is what you've been waiting for, right? So it's really important we know how to tell the difference between seals and sea lions. So our seals are going to be on the left side of the screen, and sea lions are on the right. So you might hear me use these words too. The scientific name for seals are phocids, and the scientific name for sea lions are otariids. Okay, so the first thing that you might notice between these two animals is that the seal has just ear holes. Do you guys see that, like a lizard or a snake? And then the sea lion has ear flaps. Okay. Another way you can remember that is that a seal's ears are sealed up, so they don't have that external pinnae. Yeah, pro move. Another way that you can tell otariids and phocids apart from one another is that the phocids, the way that they move on land is that they scoot or undulate, but the sea lions have the ability to rotate their back flippers under their body and walk. Okay? And then finally, the way that both of these groups move through water is very different. So the phocids use their back flippers for propulsion, and then their front flippers kind of just do this every once in a while to help them steer. And then the sea lions, or the otariids, are the opposite. They use their powerful front flippers for propulsion, and then their back flippers are kind of useless under the water. So we're going to see videos of this. So this is a seal moving in slow motion. This is a seal scooting or undulating, as compared to a sea lion, which you'll see those back flippers kind of rotated underneath its body to move. I think that's a South American sea lion. They're terrifying. So how they move underwater is different, right? So this is the seal, and you'll see this is a Weddell seal in the Antarctic, and it's using its back flippers for propulsion. It's also tagged. Do you guys see the blue tags in the back flippers? Unlike the otariids, where they use their powerful front fore flippers for propulsion. Okay, so in these next couple slides, I'm just kind of showing you examples of seals and sea lions. And so these are Arctic seals. They live at the North Pole. And moving clockwise, you have the bearded seal, the spotted seal, ringed seal, which is a polar bear's favorite food, and the ribbon seal. There's also seals at the South Pole in Antarctica. Again, moving clockwise, we have the leopard seal, the Waddell seal, that's what we were watching a video of, the crab-eater seal, and the southern elephant seal, so handsome. And then these are some examples of sea lions, right? We have the Hooker sea lion, the South American sea lion, that was the one that was running on the beach, the Australian sea lion, and the Galapagos sea lion. The Galapagos sea lion is actually very closely related to the California sea lions that we have here at our coast. Okay, I'm quizzing you. Are these animals phocids or otariids? You guys, yes. Yes, these are otariids, but look how silly that name is. It's confusing. So these are otariids. These are fur seals, the Guadalupe fur seal, New Zealand fur seal, northern fur seal, and the Antarctic fur seal. The northern fur seal here, remember I was talking about fur and blubber, right? The northern fur seal has the thickest fur of any pinniped, and I actually have a pelt here, which just like working with marine mammals, you're actually not supposed to have marine mammal parts either. There are exceptions to that. So I actually worked with a tribe, an Aleut tribe in the Aleutian Islands, and this was gifted to me. And there's some art on the back, which it is legal, but I encourage you to come up and touch this. It's really special. Just ask that you use the back of your hand. And when you come up here and check it out, go in the opposite direction. You'll see something really special underneath that guard here. That's all I'm going to say. So those are really cool pinnipeds, but these are the ones that exist on our coast. Okay, we have the Pacific harbor seal, the northern elephant seal. No one's laughing at this photo. I'm so sorry if it's offensive. It's the real. That's like the life of an elephant seal in one photo. The California sea lion, the Steller sea lion, and then occasionally we get fur seals here. Sometimes we get northern fur seals, and occasionally we'll also get Guadalupe fur seals. But for the remainder of this talk, I'm going to mostly focus on these 4 species, starting with the Pacific harbor seal. I had a sound bite, but we're going to skip it. They sound really cute. I was going to imitate them, but I'm not going to. So they range everywhere from Alaska to essentially Mexico. And you can find them in coastal waters and kind of sometimes where fresh water meets salt water and brackish water, you can find them. And they eat everything. I've seen one in the field eating an octopus. They'll eat squid and flounder, flatfish, so they'll eat whatever they can find. So remember I told you I was going to introduce you to these species and also talk about relevant research that's happening mostly in California. So this is a project that's really special to me. This is my friend Carly, who's a PhD student at UC Davis. And what she did her master's thesis research on was understanding how harbor seals interact with enrichment. So I'm going to give you a little bit of context. Sometimes animals strand, right? They come up either dead or alive from the ocean, okay? And there's facilities like the Marine Mammal Center in Sausalito that take sick and injured animals and rehab them, fatten them up, and then put them back into the wild, okay? However, typically when they do that, there isn't much stimulation happening in the pools during that time. It's mostly just, here's some food, good luck. And so part of Carly's research was understanding how their hormones, how their stress hormones in particular, are affected by having things that maybe might mimic kind of what they'll see in real life in the ocean while they're in captivity. And she's also trying to promote foraging behavior, because a lot of times these animals are kind of like force-fed, or they do a little bit of fish school for sure, but this is a little bit more, she hopes, realistic of foraging. So she'll tie little pieces of fish in this fake kelp and encourage them to play, is the word that she uses actually. So, perfect. I'm going to spend about 8 minutes talking about elephant seals because they're awesome, and you have some in your backyard, which is really cool. And this is work that I've been involved with mostly with UC Santa Cruz at Año Nuevo. Who's been to Año Nuevo before? Yeah, you do see the elephant seals? Rad. So we're going to talk about northern elephant seals. The really special thing about these animals, this is this skull here, they're huge, is that they can travel up to 14,000 miles in a single year, which is really far. This map is frustrating to me because we've actually discovered that males and females, though they take different routes, sometimes they do different things. Sometimes males go towards Hawaii and sometimes females go up towards the Aleutians, but generally this is true. Males can weigh 5,000 pounds. I'm going to let you just like sit with that for a second while I drink water. That's so big, right? That's like the size of a car. Mm-hmm. And what's really special about elephant seals is that they have a very interesting social structure. They have alphas and betas and peripheral males that kind of establish dominance over huge harems of females, up to 200 females, which I'll talk about in a second. So personally, I've had the opportunity to work at these 3 locations extensively, especially at Año Nuevo State Park. And I'm going to dive into that research, but first we need to become experts in natural history of the elephant seal. And so I'm going to go back a slide. Sorry for going back and forth like that. We're going to focus essentially December through March. I'm going to orient you to this circular thing. Essentially, elephant seals, when they are on land, they all arrive depending on their sex and their age class. Okay, so it's not like, it's wintertime, who's there? It really varies, okay? But essentially, December through March is the breeding season. So adult males and adult females and pups are there at that time. So right now, if you go to this colony I'm going to tell you about in a couple minutes, you'll see some juveniles hauling out. But around Thanksgiving and around the first week of December, adult males will start hauling out, which is really exciting. So this is an adult male. They'll arrive in early December, and this is when they weigh 5,000 pounds. But every day throughout the breeding season, they're losing up to 10 pounds a day because they're fasting from December through March. So by the end of the breeding season, they'll lose up to a third or even a half of their body weight. But to become a big male like that, you essentially start off small and you grow up. And you'll notice that a couple things are changing. Their nose is getting bigger, their size is getting bigger, and that chest shield, that kind of neck scar, yucky looking thing, is also growing, and eventually they'll look like this. Females arrive a bit after the male is pregnant, and they'll be here in December. It's like the best Christmas present ever. And then they give birth, and pups are born essentially just a few days after the females arrive, and then are weaned in February. So check this out. This is a pup, and it has a crazy looking black coat. First of all, what's that called? Quiz time. Lanugo, yes, and it's black, right? And so they vary depending on the species. And then, so the last kind of stage of the breeding season is breeding. This is, I know it's really crazy, huh? So this occurs, I'm not kidding, mostly around Valentine's Day, easy to remember. So peak breeding happens in Valentine's Day. This is a pup. This is her pup. And that female is ready to mate essentially when her pup weans. And so this is like a really normal thing that you'll see in the field. This is a drone shot of an elephant seal colony at Año Nuevo. And what's really interesting is if we take a close look, I know even in the back you'll hopefully be able to see this, there's a couple things going on. First, there's a lot of seals on this beach. And you can actually see the different kinds of structure here, right? So the big animals are mostly females, and occasionally you'll see a male. In the next photo, you'll see a male that's really clear, but the little black dots are all pups, okay? And this is a really powerful tool to help us like count seals, because walking through this, so that was my job for 5 years, it's fun, but it's like super dangerous, and it's also really hard to see. And so we've been implementing drones at UC Santa Cruz to help us count seals, which has been a really powerful tool. So this is a little bit easier to see, right? So this kind of looks like a kind of big group of animals, but there's a system here. This is the alpha. He's in the middle of this harem. Okay. There's these kind of subordinate males, which won't have that much breeding access. They might sneak in a copulation or two, but ultimately that alpha has kind of the rights over all these females who are all nursing pups. Do you guys see those black Lanugo, those pups? And then there's also these loser males. These are peripheral males who might maybe have a strategy of sneaking in. Both Emma and I have seen this in the field where males will kind of just scoot on their belly, sometimes even put their nose, not in their mouth, but in the sand and sneak in and kind of act like a female to get in there, which is pretty exciting. So though they might get a copulation in maybe once, they're losers. So a lot of times when I talk to people about elephant seals, I think they envision a lot of fighting happening. That's what I certainly envisioned when I started working with these animals. But in reality, I told you that these males are fasting. And this is very energetically expensive to fight. And so a lot of interactions are actually resolved by acoustics. So, So there's a video here. I'm gonna try. Was this a mistake? It's a mistake. It's a mistake. Thanks, Michaela. So you won't be able to hear them vocalize, but this is a fight that is really, it's essentially uncommon to see in the breeding season. Typically, so this is GC 724, also known as One-Eyed Sam. He doesn't have an eye. Do you guys see that? He's missing his eye. And this is GB 436. I think he was alpha one season. And so sometimes there's a combination, right, of acoustic and physical displays. In the back, that's Carolyn Casey, a graduate student I worked with, and she's recording those animals, and that'll come into play in a couple minutes here. Thanks. There's going to be like 3 videos in a row. Thanks, Michaela. So essentially, like I said, most fights are not physical. They're actually acoustic. So this is an alpha at a place called North Point at Año Nuevo, and he's displacing this male simply by an acoustic stimulant. Does that make sense? Cool. We're going to skip that one. I think that's it for at least 5 minutes. Thanks, Michaela. So part of my job while working with elephant seals are highlighted here in blue. A big part of what a lab in UCSC at UC Santa Cruz is interested in is understanding those interactions and essentially how those fights are mitigated through acoustics. I could give a whole talk about that. I'm not going to, but in a moment I will also share with you, we're not just interested in kind of what these elephant seals are saying to one another, but we're also really interested in what is encoded within that call. And so part of this acoustic lab, we record these calls and we play them back at animals, which you'll see a video of and how they responded to that as well. So that's the Playback Experiments. In order to do those, there's some things that we have to understand, and one is who these animals are. So I'm going to show you videos of us actually marking animals, because these animals, they look very similar, and so we have to be able to identify them from one another. And then we also did other things like behavioral observations and also weighing 300 pups every season. We're very busy. So part of understanding how many animals arrive and how many leave are through a process called resites or MarkRecapture. And so part of our jobs out in the field is to go up to these animals and look for these tiny, tiny flipper tags. Here, you should check it out when you get up in the front. But these are really hard to see, and so sometimes these animals will have dye marks on their side that you literally write on with hair dye of the tag number, and we'll see that in a second. And so this is kind of what it looks like to deploy those flipper tags. I don't have a video that I could share with you today, but essentially what we do to apply those flipper tags in order to tell animals apart from one another is you go up to an animal when they're sleeping and pick up their flipper and spread it open, and then essentially go in with this instrument and kind of punch that tag through the webbing. People usually ask me, does that hurt? Yeah, probably, but they usually fall right back asleep within about 40 seconds. So it's not so disruptive that it really interrupts their entire day. And it's really, really valuable to be able to understand kind of the immigration rates of these animals and how many are coming to shore, how many are leaving, and these tags last the lifetime of the animal. This is another picture of some colleagues tagging. So again, these tags are really hard to see, and so what we do sometimes is we mark them with hair dye, and the animal doesn't wake up. It's really awesome. So you can read that tag number and literally write it on the animal. And I think I have a video, if you don't mind. Thanks, Mikhail, I'm the worst. So this is Carolyn sneaking up on an animal that's awake. And she's just writing the flipper tag on him. Yeah, it's pretty awesome. He doesn't wake up, spoiler alert. I'm gonna advance, thanks. I think that's it for a while. So sometimes though, they're hard to mark because females are super aggressive. And so we implement something called a Stampy Poll. And the Stampy Poll works when you're dealing with aggressive females and pups. So we don't use black hair dye on the pup, we use blonde hair dye on the pups. I'm gonna skip some stuff here. So a huge part of, again, what we did is we did a lot of acoustic recording, and we use those acoustics to do a playback. So every male essentially has his own different acoustic signature. And so once they hit maturity, this call is super salient. It will not change once they're about 12 years old, which is pretty cool. And they use the information encoded within a call. Other males use that info to kind of know who's who within the colony, right? So they don't have to physically fight. They can say, oh, that's X579, he's alpha, I'm out of here. I'm going to skip through some slides here because I'm running out of time, but essentially we did these playback experiments where there's a speaker here, there's an animal here, and we essentially did these experiments where we played maybe a dominant call to this animal and we watched how they reacted. And spoiler alert, they reacted pretty much exactly as you would expect. And so if you played a dominant vocalization to a subordinate male, he would retreat from the speaker. And the opposite was true. We had actually a speaker destroyed once from a male because we played a subordinate call to him and he destroyed the speaker. So it's not just a visual stimulus, it's mostly an acoustic one. Skipping. There's so much I want to talk about. So that was Año Nuevo. The Farallones was something that was pretty wild. Have you guys heard of the Farallones, right? It's about 30 miles offshore from the San Francisco. And there's a lot of different pinnipeds there. The goals were the same, but it was a very different type of substrate. It wasn't beach, it's mostly rock. And there's only about 200 seals there. And then finally, what I really wanted to get to was your elephant seal here in Humboldt County. So you have an elephant seal colony at the King Range National Conservation Area. Has anyone been to the Punta Gorda Lighthouse before? Okay, well, if you're physically able to make it down there, I highly encourage you to go safely. It's about a 3-mile hike from the mouth of the Atoll. And now that you're all pinniped biologists, I encourage you also to stay on the trail and encourage others to do so. But it's this really special place that has some challenges associated with it because things like this are happening. And so I don't think we really have a management plan in place yet, but certainly there's very skilled folks working on how we kind of solve this challenge. And part of it is just understanding how many animals are there and maybe predicting how many will be there in 10 years, right? So there's actually a graduate student here. Emma, will you just raise your hand? So if you have any questions, you should ask Emma about it because this is her thesis project. And we're deploying blue flipper tags there, which is pretty awesome. Unfortunately, I don't have time to talk about California sea lions except that they're doing pretty well. A lot of people ask me that, like, what's the biggest conservation kind of challenge with pinnipeds? I would say California sea lions are doing okay. However, they are definitely susceptible to things that are occurring. Just about 5 years ago and kind of lingering, we had something called the blob. Do y'all remember that? Yeah, it's like this warm water occurring offshore, and that really changed a lot of things in the ocean. And sea lions kind of were affected by that. The pups weren't doing very well because females had to forage maybe further and longer offshore, and pups did not do well. So generally, though, California sea lions are doing okay. They are susceptible to other things, like Domoic acid poisoning. If people want to talk to me about that, I'm happy to talk about it at the end. But generally, sea lions are okay. Stellar sea lions, on the other hand, that live in Alaska and the Aleutians, have a little bit of a different story. Their stock is essentially divided in half, and one of the stocks is doing really well, and the other is not. And again, if you have questions on that, we can talk about it. But what I really want to get to is seabirds, because we have 4 minutes left. So as I said, I'm wearing a lot of hats today, but the hat that I'm really proud to wear is the Bureau of Land Management, which is a partner of the North Coast Seabird Protection Network. And right now, we're actually looking for volunteers. So to entice you to volunteer for us, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the North Coast Seabird Protection Network. So the North Coast Seabird Protection Network is a chapter of many, but we're interested in essentially understanding and reducing disturbance to seabirds. Okay. We study essentially 8 species. What species is this? Yes, this is a common murre. And we study cormorants and western gulls, black oyster catchers, and also some pinnipeds. And these are essentially our goals: is monitoring the species, doing outreach like what I'm doing now, and then management. So if you choose to volunteer with us, you get to go to really, really beautiful places. We have Brandt's cormorants, marble murrelets, and pigeon guillemots. And this is essentially what you would be doing. We're asking that volunteers come and help with essentially 2 different types of monitoring. One of them is population monitoring, where you would essentially drive along the coast and help us identify and count seabird species. And the other is to help us understand disturbance. And so there's going to be a new kind of training opportunity this upcoming spring where you'll help us kind of understand essentially how human use might be affecting these animals. And so there's a really awesome spot on Trinidad Head where I think we're going to be training volunteers to essentially sit and watch boats and look at MERS, and you get to see views like this all day. So this is a little bit of a busy slide, but I have essentially information here. There's a lot of flyers, and we're going to be having spring training in the end of March. And something I really want to tell you is that you don't have to be a seabird expert to participate in this program. There's people who have never even explored the coast in any sort of capacity that we had last year, and then we have expert birders who know birds 100 times better than I do. So wherever you fall in that spectrum, we welcome you. And you can come to training and then you can leave if you're not into it. So it's really low commitment to at least come to training. And if you have any questions, I encourage you to ask me. I really want to have a discussion if you have any questions about anything I just shared with you, because I kind of went fast at the end. So let me hear your questions. I'm excited. Yeah. I could only hear the second part of your question. Fukushima? I guess I can't speak to that. I can't think of a paper to pull out of my back pocket to show you that. Certainly there are some contaminants that affect marine mammals. And I think I'll leave it at that. But definitely mercury affects animals that live in the ocean. Is that okay as an answer? Okay, cool, yeah.
What about toxoplasmosis? Toxoplasmosis affect the pinnipeds?
Toxoplasmosis, does it, Emma? I'm most sea otters? Okay, that's from cat poop, right? Yeah, I know that's a problem in Hawaii with the Hawaiian monk seal. Yeah, I don't hear it as much as an issue here with pinnipeds. Definitely Domoic acid is a big deal with these animals. And essentially what Domoic acid is it's from Pseudonychae, which is a type of algal bloom. And what happens is that fish eat the algae, and then the way that sea lions eat is they just gorge. So they find a bunch of food and then they eat until they almost vomit. Unlike a harbor seal is a sit and wait predator. So maybe we'll pick off a fish or two, and also they have a slightly different diet than a sea lion. So the way that sea lions eat and what they're eating essentially causes this toxin to bioaccumulate in their body. And the Pseudonychae creates something called Domoic acid poisoning. And what that does is it actually creates lacerations, little tears in the hippocampus, which I guess is the part of your brain that helps you with short-term memory. And so a lot of these animals are found displaying really unusual behaviors and symptoms. One was seen just on highways and in places that they shouldn't be. And you can actually see that on an necropsy. You can see those lacerations on the brain. So it's pretty gnarly. And eventually, they have a lot of seizures and pass away. I don't really have any more to say than that, because I'm not an expert in toxoplasmosis, but I know a lot about Domoic acid. That's it. Yeah, sure. I think here. Oh yeah.
Is the population of seals and sea lions on the increase or level or?
Yeah. So here's a poster of all the pinnipeds. I think there's 35 species? Ooh, I should know that. I think there's about 35. And depending on the species, that answer changes. So the Hawaiian monk seal, not doing good. There's 1,100 of them. California sea lions, hundreds of thousands. Elephant seal, 300,000. So it's a complicated question because sometimes the population might be doing well, but there might be some secret things happening that maybe might not be so good. Entanglements are still a huge problem with a lot of these species. But just to answer generally your question, which is how are they doing? I think it really depends on the species. Yeah, that's my answer for that.
I guess my second question is, what is their sharks eat them, right?
Yeah.
Is that their biggest downfall? Or,
yeah.
There's getting to be less and less sharks away from what I read and hear about.
Certainly.
Especially after the movie Jaws. So,
Yeah, sharks aren't doing so well either, huh? There's a lot of them getting taken out of the ocean. It's unfortunate. Yeah, they're such an important apex predator in the whole marine system. They kind of keep things in check. But yeah, certainly a shark is a predator for pinnipeds. Definitely killer whales are as well. And I guess if I was to list the threats of pinnipeds, sharks, you know, I don't even maybe consider it a threat. Maybe for the perspective of the sea lion, it's a threat. But I think direct and indirect fisheries interactions is sometimes, I mean, that's a heated thing to say, but I think that's kind of a threat to a lot of these animals. Just those direct threats like entanglements and things is hard. And there's, you know, a lot of fish in the ocean, but it's also predicted that in 100 years we won't have that much fish in the ocean. So loaded answer to your question. But yeah, from the perception of a sea lion and a seal, sharks are definitely a threat to their livelihood. Yeah. Yeah, to answer your question?
there's a balance, though, or should be.
Totally. Totally. The ocean is complicated. There's lots of interesting interactions. Yeah.
I know we had that threat last year and early this year of the blue-green algae and then infecting mussels and sea urchins and basically all invertebrates. How does that translate to their survivability?
At least with a lot of the animals that I talked about today, which I can speak to, most of them aren't, I don't think, eating crustaceans that would be affected by that. Certainly the toxoplasmosis that the gentleman brought up in back, and which I'm not an expert in, and then things like domoic acid will affect them. But blue-green algae that affects crustaceans, I don't think they affect.
Well, I figured they ate fish as well, and fish tend to be,
Okay.
some fish can be foragers, so I wasn't sure if there was like a huge
Yeah.
chain that went up.
Yeah, certainly with things like that, they tend to bioaccumulate, like with mercury, that's a thing, right? And it's actually found that northern elephant seals, like this guy behind me, when they go through that catastrophic molt, they actually deposit so much mercury on the beach. My friend just published a paper a couple years ago that when that happens, they essentially have like exponentially more mercury on the beach. So that's a tangential answer to your question, but yeah, I can't speak to the blue-green algae offshore here, but maybe. Yeah.
What about plastics? Any studies on plastics?
Certainly. Again, not my specialty. You know, plastic is one of the biggest issues in the ocean, right? And not just gross, like big, gross pieces of plastic, right? It's like the tiny microplastics are a really big deal. And then the chemicals that they leach out, I think, is a really big deal as well. How that affects pinniped demography and things that I consider well versed in, I am not sure. But I cannot leave this room without saying plastics is one of the biggest issues in the ocean right now. But I don't know how, besides entanglements and maybe some of that chemical things that we're kind of focusing on right now, which I can't totally speak to, I'm sure there's effects. Yeah, totally. Yeah, if there's a plastic expert. Yeah.
Okay, so I kind of have two questions.
Sure.
So, which species mainly occupy like Alaska, where that bird is, San Francisco, and Hawaii? And then the second part of the question is, are those the species which are declining in numbers?
Oh my gosh. You're like quizzing me. I love it. So, what species occur in Alaska?
Alaska, San Francisco, and Hawaii.
Well, so those are all essentially different species. You just kind of hit maybe where, here we go, like 70% of pinnipeds occur. So most of the species on this chart, maybe 60% of them occur in those areas actually. So every species I talked about today, northern fur seals, there's like, yeah, I mean, I would have to list most of the species on this poster to answer that question. A lot of species occur in the temperate and Arctic. I mean, they're worldwide. So maybe we'll move that question until you and I can talk and we'll talk about it. And then you said which ones are doing well?
I don't know, well, because my question kind of goes, it's back to the Fukushima thing, because
Okay.
I was wondering if those areas are supposed to be affected by those
Right.
or whatever, and so I'm wondering if those species occupying those areas are declining or not.
Sure. It's a really hard thing to point a finger on. I think what you're speaking about right now, it's hard to, I think, point at something and say, this is what is affecting this. And in general in the ocean, it's really hard to do that. So I think that's a good question that we can discuss. But I'm not going to stand here and say it's directly linked to Fukushima. I can't do that. Yeah. Yeah.
If you want to talk about radionuclides in fish and marine animals, I'm happy to. There's no evidence that any of the contamination from Fukushima actually has negative effects on marine mammals in the eastern Pacific Ocean.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, we should chat about it. I'd like to learn some more stuff. Yeah, and certainly a big, cause of death for a lot of sea lions is cancer too, and we can talk about that. That's interesting. Alone, that sentence is interesting. So, yeah.
Going off the assumption that you have experience with like far northern like Arctic species.
Yeah.
I know that the regression of Arctic ice is affecting a lot of species.
Oh my
Do you
gosh.
notice that happening at all with the pinnipeds up there?
Yeah. So, can I actually jump to the South Pole actually to answer that question? So there's this kind of duality that I think I've heard. It's called like the winners and losers of climate change. And something that's happening with southern elephant seals that I know to be true and that I can speak to is that a lot of our southern ice extent is essentially going away, like ice is melting in the Antarctic. But what that's doing actually for southern elephant seals is it's creating, here I go, more habitat. So southern elephant seals are like the winners and some that we can see. It might change in 50 years, but what we're observing in the Antarctic is there happens to be more elephant seals. They're hauling out in way more, like they have more space, their colonies are expanding. But the penguins that live down there are the opposite. They have to like walk further to like make nests or whatever they do. They don't make nests. So I think that's kind of this interesting duality, but southern elephant seals are actually, we don't know for sure, but they're not doing terribly. In contrast, with the sea ice up north, I know walruses are not doing well because ice is retreating, and they really depend on ice to pup and to socialize and to rest. And so, it's generally a huge problem, but I think it's interesting to think about the opposite thing happening too. It's interesting. Not good, not bad, just interesting.
What's the lifespan of an elephant seal versus, let's say, one of our harbors?
A question that I can know the answer to. Thank you. So male and female elephant seals have different lifespans. Who do you guys think lives longer? Duh, female. Yeah, so females live until about 16. They can live as old as 20. And then male elephant seals live to 12, 13, maybe 14. Yeah, I guess it's relative. It's kind of long. Yeah, and so, about 15 if you take the average. Yeah, good question. I knew the answer. Yeah.
Do you think that sea otters are ever going to be colonized?
That's such a hard question to answer, right?
What was the question?
Sure. So I think he was asking if southern sea otters would ever come back to the North Coast. I think it's been attempted, actually. I can look. I can find a paper with you, but I think it's actually been attempted, and they haven't done super well for whatever reason. I have some collaborators in Fort Bragg who are really interested in that question, actually, because of the interesting dynamic that's been occurring with the urchins and the abalone, like that whole thing, and the removal of a top predator in an ocean system. In any system kind of changes what we see, right? And so with the removal of the southern sea otter and the sea star, the sunflower star, and a lot of other things, we had this dynamic that we're seeing now where there's these kind of urchin barrens. And so there's people who are very interested in that question. Maybe if we bring top predators, will that kind of change the system? And that's a hard question to answer. And I think we try to do that a lot in other systems too. And sometimes it works out and sometimes it does not at all. I think from a biological perspective, they could totally do well up here. I mean, they have food, there's kelp. I don't think there's as much macrocystis, like the giant kelp. I don't think that there's that much here, but they could wrap themselves in bull kelp maybe, I don't know. Yeah, so I think biologically speaking, a sea otter could live here. Yeah.
Yeah, but metabolically, that was what was deemed impossible.
What, it was too cold?
Yeah, the metabolic rate was slowed.
Okay, show me that. Let's talk. Because there's northern sea otters that live in Alaska, right? So anyway, we have no more time, maybe a minute.
Yeah, I thought what I would do is end the public questions and thank Claire for her excellent talk. Allow people who might need to go, and then I'm sure she might take a few questions
Happily.
If people. So
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks guys.